Many different opinions exist concerning one of the more controversial statements from the family, A Proclamation to the World. The controversial statement is about gender. It says, "Gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose." Let's assume this statement is true and explore its implications. In this video, we'll discuss, can gender change? Could a person be born in the wrong body? And what does this mean for intersex individuals? But first, we need to understand a little theology. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints teaches that we each existed as spirits before being born into physical bodies. The soul constitutes the spirit and the body together. At death, the spirit and body are separated until they are reunited forever in the resurrection. In summary, we lived before we were born, we live now, and we will live forever. Now that we understand this basic theology, let's examine the statement. Gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, mortal, and eternal identity and purpose. What does essential mean? Essential means it is a necessity for an individual. Therefore, everyone must have a gender. There's no way around this. It is essential. Furthermore, if something can change, then it is not essential. Suppose four sides are an essential characteristic of a square. If we change that characteristic even slightly, then the square ceases to exist. It becomes something different, such as a triangle. Conversely, if something is an essential characteristic, then it cannot change. In terms of gender, if gender can change, then it is not an essential characteristic. While gender itself is essential, is it possible for gender to be fluid, such as changing between male and female? Let's break down this statement from the family of Proclamation to the World into its individual parts. The statement asserts the following. Number 1, gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal, spiritual identity and purpose. Number 2, gender is an essential characteristic of individual mortal, physical identity and purpose. And number 3, gender is an essential characteristic of individual eternal identity and purpose. Let's examine each of these. If gender is an essential characteristic of individual premortal identity and purpose, then gender cannot change within the premortal realm. In other words, a spirit could not have changed gender. Otherwise, it would not be an essential characteristic of that individual's identity and purpose premortally. This is like the four-sided characteristic of a square. An object with 3 sides is no longer a square. The same also applies to the mortal or physical realm. Gender cannot change within the realm. But can you change your gender between these stages? So gender cannot change within the premortal or spiritual life and within the mortal or physical life. But could it change between these? Specifically, could a premortal female spirit be a mortal male or vice versa? To examine this, let's consider the last part of the statement. Gender is an essential characteristic of individual eternal identity and purpose. Eternity encompasses all phases, the premortal, mortal, and postmortal. Since gender is essential to an individual's identity and purpose in eternity, it follows that gender cannot change between these stages. If gender were to change between the premortal and mortal stages, it would no longer be essential across eternity. But could you be born in the wrong body? We've established that the statement from the family of Proclamation to the World implies that gender remains the same eternally. However, some may propose that a female spirit could be born into a male body during mortality, or vice versa. Is this possible given the statement? Based on what we have established, this would result in a contradiction. If a person were in the wrong body, then their mortal or physical gender would be different from their premortal or spiritual gender. In this case, since gender changed between the premortal or spiritual and physical or mortal, it would no longer be essential for eternal identity and purpose. It is important to note that the body is not merely a suit that the spirit wears. Rather, the body and spirit together constitute the soul. Although the body is prone to mutations, birth defects, and various imperfections, its essence is the physical manifestation of the spirit. The body is just as much you as the spirit. The body is the physical you, while the spirit is the spiritual you. But what about intersex individuals? Are they a counterexample to the idea that spiritual gender must match physical gender? Due to the imperfect nature of the mortal experience, some people are born with physical anomalies such as birth defects. While physical imperfections can exist, they should be understood as anomalies that don't alter the fundamental relationship between spirit and body. Let's return to our square example. If you draw a square on a piece of paper, it might not look perfect. Perhaps it's skewed or drawn unevenly, making it hard to see its essential characteristic, which is the 4 sides. However, it must still have the 4 sides to be a square. If it were so deformed that it only had 3 sides, it would be a triangle, not a square. The essential characteristic would be lost. The essential characteristic must be present, even if it's hard to detect. This is similar to the intersex conditions. The physical manifestation of gender may not always be clear, but because gender is essential to an individual's identity and purpose, it must still exist. Birth defects and anomalies can only affect the non-essential traits. Just as a person cannot be born into the body of an animal and still be considered a person cannot be born into the wrong gender and still be the same person because their gender is essential to their identity. If the body doesn't match the spirit's gender, then the body would not be a true manifestation of the spirit. Any significant misalignments between the two would be problematic for the concept of gender being essential. If we accept that gender is eternal and cannot change across the stages of existence, then the body must in some way reflect the spirit's gender in mortality. The idea that gender is essential through all phases of existence implies that it is not merely a social or psychological characteristic, but something inherent to both the spirit and the body. If a body was created with a gender opposite to the spirit, then the physical manifestation would not just be an imperfection, but a fundamental deviation that undermines the concept of eternal gender. This would break the essential characteristic of gender. It seems to me that the family of proclamation to the world is pretty clear on what gender means. Just like it's very clear that the Book of Mormon actually does not contain any anachronisms. That's right, you heard me correctly. And to find out more about this, you're going to have to check out the next video.